Daniel had always dreamed of traveling the world, and London was at the top of his list. The city's rich history, grand architecture, and famous traditions had always fascinated him. When he finally saved enough money for his trip, he couldn't contain his excitement. He planned to visit all the iconic landmarks: the Tower of London, Buckingham Palace, and, of course, the famous Horse Guards Parade. Before leaving, Daniel spent hours watching videos about London's traditions. He was especially interested in the Royal Guards, the soldiers in red uniforms and tall black hats who stood completely still, no matter what happened around them. Some tourists would try to make them laugh, wave in their faces, or even shout jokes, but the guards never reacted. Daniel found it impressive. However, what caught his attention even more were the videos about the Royal Guards horses. These magnificent animals stood tall and proud, their riders just as serious and disciplined as the foot soldiers. Daniel's friends, who had traveled to London before, warned him about the strict rules surrounding the guards. "You can take pictures, but don't get too close," one of them told him. "And whatever you do, don't touch the horses." But Daniel wasn't worried. He thought people were just being overly cautious. After all, he had seen so many tourists standing next to the guards and horses, posing for pictures. It looked harmless. Finally, the day arrived. Daniel landed in London, checked into his hotel, and wasted no time heading out to explore the city. The streets were bustling with tourists, and the air buzzed with excitement. As he walked through the grand avenues, he admired the old buildings and the famous red buses that moved through the city. Every turn felt like stepping into a history book. When he finally reached Horse Guards Parade, he was mesmerized. The grand stone archway, the serious-looking guards, and, of course, the horses, it was all exactly like he had imagined. A crowd of tourists stood around, taking pictures and admiring the scene. Some snapped selfies, others pointed at the guards, and a few simply watched in silent respect. Daniel pulled out his phone and started recording. He wanted to capture every moment of his trip, and this was no exception. As he walked closer, he could feel the power of the horses. They were enormous, their black coats gleaming under the sunlight. The guards sat tall and motionless, their faces expressionless. Something inside Daniel stirred. He wanted more than just a regular tourist photo. He wanted something different, something that would make his trip truly unforgettable. He noticed that other people were keeping a safe distance, but he figured he could get just a little closer. After all, nothing had happened to the others. Smiling to himself, he stepped forward. What he didn't realize was that his moment of excitement was about to turn into a lesson he would never forget. Daniel held his phone tightly, making sure to get the perfect angle as he approached the royal guard and his horse. The crowd around him was busy taking pictures, some standing at a respectful distance, while others posed carefully near the horses. The guards remained completely still, their faces showing no emotion. The horses, trained to remain calm in busy environments, stood tall and majestic, their black coats shining under the bright London sky. Daniel looked around and noticed that no one was getting too close. Most people followed the signs that warned tourists not to touch the guards or their horses. But Daniel wasn't satisfied with just standing nearby. He wanted something more, something unique. He had seen people take selfies from a distance, but he wanted to be right next to the horse, maybe even touching it. After all, what was the harm? The guards never reacted to tourists, and the horses looked gentle. Ignoring the small voice in his head telling him to be careful, he took another step forward. His heart pounded with excitement as he moved closer to the massive black stallion. The horse was taller than he had expected, its muscles strong and firm. The guard sitting on top didn't even glance at him, maintaining his strict, unmoving posture. Daniel turned on his front camera and adjusted the angle. He wanted to capture himself with the horse's head right next to him. He took a few pictures but wasn't satisfied. The horse's face wasn't entirely in the frame. That's when an idea popped into his head. What if he pulled the horse's bridle just a little so that it faced the camera? It would only take a second, and then he'd have the perfect picture. Without thinking twice, Daniel reached out his hand and lightly tugged on the bridle. The moment his fingers touched the leather strap, everything changed. In an instant, the horse reacted. It let out a sharp, forceful snort and jerked its head away from his grip. The sudden movement startled Daniel, making him take a quick step back. But before he could regain his balance, he heard the guard's deep, firm voice cut through the air. "Stand back." It was the first time Daniel had heard a royal guard speak in person, and it sent a chill down his spine. His heart raced as he realized what he had just done. The once cheerful crowd around him fell silent, their eyes wide with surprise. Some people gasped, while others whispered among themselves. Daniel's face turned red as he quickly dropped his hand, stepping away from the horse. He hadn't expected the guard to react at all, let alone speak so sternly. His excitement had completely faded, replaced by a mix of embarrassment and nervousness. The tourists around him stared, some even raising their phones to record the moment. For the first time, Daniel truly understood. These weren't just ordinary horses, and the guards weren't here for entertainment. He had crossed the line, and now he would face the consequences. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped back, his face burning with embarrassment. The sudden reaction of the horse and the guard's firm warning had caught him completely off guard. Just moments ago, he had felt excited and confident, but now, standing in front of a silent crowd with all eyes on him, he realized he had made a mistake. The guard remained perfectly still after speaking, his expression unchanged, but his words had been strong and clear. It wasn't just a casual reminder. It was a command, one that carried the weight of discipline and authority. The horse, now alert, shifted slightly, its ears twitching. Even though it had calmed down, Daniel could tell that it had not appreciated being pulled. A few murmurs spread through the crowd. Some tourists whispered to each other, while others looked at Daniel with amused expressions. A couple of people had even lifted their phones to record the moment. He could already imagine the headlines. "Tourist ignores rules and gets scolded by royal guard." The thought made him feel even more foolish. His friends, who had been watching from a few steps away, finally approached him. One of them, James, shook his head and let out a small laugh. "Man, I told you not to get too close," he whispered. That was way too risky. Daniel swallowed hard. He knew his friend was right. He had ignored the warning signs, thinking he could get away with it. Now, not only had he embarrassed himself, but he had also disrupted a moment that was meant to be respected. Wanting to move past the awkwardness, Daniel forced a nervous smile and tried to act like it was no big deal. "All right, let's go," he said, slipping his phone into his pocket. He was hoping to leave the scene quickly before the situation became worse. But just as he turned to walk away, the unexpected happened. The horse, still on edge from the sudden pull, shifted its weight again. Only this time, it lifted its front hoof and stomped down firmly on the ground. The sound was loud, almost like a warning. Daniel, startled, jumped back instinctively. His heart skipped a beat. The guard didn't move or say another word, but the message was clear. These horses were trained, powerful animals, and they were not to be taken lightly. Even the smallest movement from them could be strong enough to knock someone off balance. A few people in the crowd chuckled, and Daniel could feel his face turning red again. This was not how he had imagined his visit to the Horse Guards parade. He had come for an unforgettable memory, but now he was leaving with something very different, a lesson. Without saying another word, Daniel turned away and started walking down the street, his friends following behind. He had learned something important that day. Some traditions should be observed with respect, not treated like an amusement. And sometimes, a simple mistake could become a moment you would never forget. Daniel walked quickly, his heart still beating fast from what had just happened. His friends followed behind, some trying to hold back their laughter, while others looked at him with concern. He could feel the stares of the people in the crowd even as he moved further away. The embarrassment of the moment stayed with him, making his steps feel heavier. James, his closest friend, finally broke the silence. "Dude, that was crazy," he said, shaking his head. "You're lucky nothing worse happened." Daniel let out a small, awkward laugh, but deep inside, he wasn't feeling amused. He had always considered himself a smart traveler, someone who respected cultures and traditions. Yet in just a few seconds, he had made a mistake that not only embarrassed him, but also made him realize how little he truly understood about the place he was visiting. As they turned onto a quieter street, Daniel pulled out his phone, curious to see if anyone had recorded the moment. He opened a social media app and typed in keywords related to the horse guards. To his relief, there were no videos of him yet, but he knew that could change at any moment. With so many tourists around, it was only a matter of time before someone uploaded a clip of what had happened. His other friend, Mark, gave him a pat on the back. "Well, at least you learned your lesson," he said. "Those horses are no joke." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, I get it now. I shouldn't have touched the bridle. I didn't think it would be a big deal." James raised an eyebrow. "It's not just about the horse. Those guards are trained professionals. They're not there for entertainment. It's their job to protect important places, and you got too close." Hearing those words made Daniel feel even worse. He had always admired soldiers and the discipline they showed, yet he had treated the royal guards like a tourist attraction instead of respecting them as professionals. It wasn't just about the embarrassment anymore. It was about realizing that he had made a mistake in judgment. As they continued walking, they passed a small cafe. Wanting to clear his mind, Daniel suggested they take a break. They found a table near the window, and he ordered a cup of coffee. The warm drink helped him relax a little, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that he had been foolish. While they sat there, Daniel noticed an older couple at a nearby table talking about the royal guards. He listened in for a moment and heard them discussing how long and difficult the training was for both the soldiers and the horses. Some of the guards had served in the military before being chosen for this duty. The horses, too, underwent years of training to remain calm and disciplined in busy public spaces. Hearing this made Daniel realize something important. He had taken all of that for granted. He had treated the moment as just another photo opportunity, when in reality, it was something far more meaningful. For the first time since the incident, he felt truly ashamed. Daniel stirred his coffee slowly, lost in thought. His friends chatted around him, but his mind kept replaying the moment at Horse Guard's parade. The firm voice of the guard, the sudden reaction of the horse, and the silent stares from the crowd. It all felt like a scene from a movie, except he was the main character in a moment he wished he could erase. He sighed and looked up at James, who had been watching him closely. "You still thinking about it?" James asked with a small smile. Daniel nodded. "Yeah, I guess I just feel stupid. I knew the guards were serious, but I didn't really respect what they do. I treated them like a tourist attraction instead of what they really are." Mark leaned back in his chair. "Well, at least you understand that now," he said. "Some people would just laugh it off and keep doing dumb stuff." Daniel appreciated the honesty, but it didn't make him feel much better. He took a sip of his coffee and glanced out the window. London was still as lively as ever, with people walking up and down the streets, taking in the sights. He wondered how many other tourists made the same mistake he had, thinking they could do whatever they wanted just because they were visitors. As they sat there, a notification popped up on Daniel's phone. He hesitated before opening it. His stomach tightened as he saw a new video trending under the hashtag Royal Guard. He tapped on it, and there it was, his moment of embarrassment, captured from a dozen different angles. In the video, he could see himself reaching for the horse's bridle, followed by the sharp movement of the animal and the guard's immediate warning. The reactions from the crowd were clear. Some were shocked, others amused. The comments below the video ranged from people calling him reckless to others, joking about how tourists never listen. Daniel groaned and put his phone down. Great. Now I'm famous for all the wrong reasons. James peeked at the screen and laughed. Well, at least you didn't get kicked. That would have made it really viral. Mark smirked. Yeah, you could have been the next tourist gets knocked over by a horse meme. Daniel sighed, shaking his head. I don't want to be a meme. I just want people to forget this ever happened. But he knew that wouldn't happen anytime soon. The internet never forgot, and he had learned it the hard way. The best he could do now was accept his mistake and move forward. He took another sip of his coffee and leaned back. All right, enough about this. Let's go see something else. And this time, no breaking any rules. His friends laughed, and as they left the cafe, Daniel made a silent promise to himself. He would be a better traveler from now on. Respect wasn't just about avoiding trouble. It was about truly appreciating the places and people he encountered. Daniel and his friends stepped out of the cafe and back onto the busy London streets. The cool afternoon breeze brushed against his face, but he still felt warm from the embarrassment of what had happened earlier. He tried to shake it off, reminding himself that he was here to enjoy his trip, not dwell on a mistake. James and Mark walked beside him, trying to keep the mood light. So, where to next? Mark asked, pulling up a map on his phone. We could check out the London Eye, or maybe take a boat ride on the Thames. Daniel thought for a moment. He wanted to move on from what had happened, but he also wanted to do something meaningful. That's when an idea struck him. What if we visit a museum? He suggested. Maybe something about British history. I feel like I need to learn a little more after today. James raised an eyebrow, but smiled. Look at you, turning into a responsible traveler. Mark laughed. Yeah, let's do it before you end up in another viral video. With that, they headed toward the Household Cavalry Museum, which was located near Horse Guards Parade. Daniel had read about it before, but hadn't planned on visiting. Now, after his experience, he felt like it was the perfect place to go. When they arrived, the museum was quiet, with only a few visitors inside. The walls were lined with displays showcasing the history of the Household Cavalry, the elite soldiers who served as the Queen's, now King's, personal guards. There were old uniforms, shining medals, and even historical weapons on display. Daniel stopped in front of a large painting of a soldier on horseback. The plaque beneath it explained how these guards had protected the royal family for hundreds of years. He felt a deep sense of respect as he read about their training and dedication. One of the museum guides noticed Daniel's interest and walked over. You seem very engaged, she said with a smile. Are you a fan of military history? Daniel hesitated for a second before answering. I guess I am now, he admitted. Actually, I had an interesting experience with the Royal Guards earlier today. The guide chuckled. Ah, let me guess. You got too close. Daniel sighed. Yeah, I did. I didn't realize how serious it was until the guard actually spoke. The guide nodded knowingly. It happens more often than you think. Many tourists don't understand that these soldiers aren't just there for show. They are trained to protect important places, and the horses are disciplined for duty, not entertainment. Daniel nodded. He had learned it the hard way. I wish I had understood that before. The guide smiled. Well, at least you understand it now. That's what travel is about, learning from experiences. Daniel couldn't help but smile back. Maybe this trip wasn't just about sightseeing. Maybe it was about growing as a person too. As Daniel walked through the Household Cavalry Museum, he felt a sense of appreciation growing inside him. The more he learned about the history of the Royal Guards, the more he understood why they took their duty so seriously. These soldiers weren't just standing there for tourists to take pictures with. They were part of a tradition that had been respected for centuries. He stopped in front of a glass case displaying an old uniform. The dark blue coat with gold buttons looked almost identical to what the guards still wore today. A plaque beside it explained how each soldier had to train for years before being allowed to stand guard. Their discipline, endurance, and ability to remain completely still, even in the face of distractions, were all part of their strict training. Mark joined him, reading over his shoulder. "Wow, I had no idea how tough their training was," he said, standing still for hours, staying focused no matter what. "I don't think I could do it." James nodded. "Me neither. And imagine how much patience those horses must have. They have to deal with thousands of tourists every day." Daniel sighed, thinking back to his mistake. "Yeah, and I was one of the annoying ones." Mark gave him a friendly nudge. "At least you realize that now. A lot of people wouldn't." As they continued exploring the museum, Daniel came across a small screen playing a video. It showed real footage of the guards during their training. He watched as young soldiers practiced marching in perfect formation, standing still for long periods, and even dealing with unexpected situations, like loud noises or people getting too close. One part of the video showed a soldier standing motionless, while a group of tourists tried everything to make him react. Some made funny faces, others shouted jokes, but the guard never moved. Daniel shook his head. "I can't believe people do that just for fun. It must be so annoying for them." The museum guide from earlier overheard him and smiled. "Yes, it happens quite often," she said. "But the guards are trained to ignore distractions. Their focus is on their duty, not the people trying to test them." Daniel looked down, feeling guilty again. "I wish I had thought about that before I touched the horse's bridle." The guide gave him a reassuring nod. "What's important is that you've learned from it. That's what travel is all about, experiencing new things and understanding different cultures." Daniel took a deep breath and nodded. He had come to London expecting a fun trip, but he hadn't expected to walk away with such a valuable lesson. As they left the museum, he felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The experience had changed the way he saw things. From now on, he would travel differently, not just as a tourist looking for photos, but as someone who respected the history and culture of the places he visited. As Daniel and his friends stepped out of the museum, the cool London air greeted them. The city was still bustling with tourists, taxis, and street performers, but something felt different to him now. He looked around, taking in the sights, not just as a visitor, but as someone who had learned something valuable. Mark stretched his arms and grinned. "Well, that was interesting. I never thought I'd enjoy a museum visit so much." James nodded. "Yeah, same here. And I think someone here learned an important lesson today." He smirked at Daniel. Daniel chuckled. Yeah, I get it. No more messing with royal guards or their horses." They walked down the street, passing by souvenir shops and small cafes. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the city. It was a perfect time for one last stop before heading back to their hotel. As they approached Horse Guards Parade again, Daniel felt a slight nervousness in his chest. The scene looked just as it had earlier in the day. The guards standing tall, the horses still and disciplined, and the tourists snapping pictures. But this time, Daniel saw it with new eyes. He stopped at a safe distance and watched quietly. A group of tourists stood nearby, laughing and posing for photos. One person was trying to get closer to a horse, reaching out with a playful smile. It was exactly what Daniel had done earlier. Without thinking, Daniel stepped forward and gently tapped the tourist on the shoulder. "Hey, I wouldn't do that," he said kindly. "The guards take their job seriously, and the horses are trained for duty. They're not here for petting." The tourist, a young man with a camera in hand, looked surprised. "Oh, really? I didn't know." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, I made the same mistake earlier. Trust me, it's not a good idea." The tourist hesitated, then pulled his hand back. "Thanks for the warning," he said, stepping away. Daniel smiled and turned back to his friends. James gave him an approving nod. "Look at you, being a responsible traveler." Mark laughed. First, you almost go viral for the wrong reasons, and now you're out here saving other tourists from doing the same thing. Daniel shrugged. Well, someone had to warn him. No point in letting others repeat my mistake. As they walked away, Daniel felt a sense of pride. He had started the day thinking of himself as just another tourist, but now he felt like he had gained something more. He understood the importance of respect, not just for traditions, but for the people who upheld them. Travel wasn't just about seeing new places. It was about learning, growing, and becoming a better person. And Daniel knew that from this trip forward, he would carry that lesson with him wherever he went. With a final glance at the royal guard standing tall, he smiled and walked on, ready for whatever adventure came next.